Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm trying to share my screen, but not quite successfully. Okay, I'm going to stop. Okay, I think this will work. Can everybody see my screen now? Yusuf, can you see my screen?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, so I'm going to start the slideshow. Just let me know if this is okay. Can you see the first screen, the first slide?
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, very good. All right, so Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So this lecture, we will discuss the issue of needs, wants, and scarcity. And the goal is to show that this idea of scarcity is completely wrong, and the methodology adopted to end scarcity in economics is completely wrong. And Islam offers a completely different and unique approach to the subject. So we have two radically different perspectives. One is that the central economic problem is scarcity. There is not enough goods to satisfy all wants and needs. And so the solution is to produce more goods, and that is growth. As opposed to this, there is the point of view of degrowth, that growth is actually destroying the planet. We are exploiting the planet at a rate which is beyond sustainable, causing a lot of harm. And so we need to stop growing and actually reduce our standards of living so that we can survive and the flora and the fauna of the planet can survive. The climate crisis that is actually is not a crisis, it's a catastrophe. Thousands of species have already been destroyed, and it seems like if we don't do things to change things, then the humanity itself will not be able to inhabit this planet if the temperature rises too far. So we need urgently to avert the climate crisis. And today, what I'm going to argue is that Islamic teachings are essential. They provide the foundation for a philosophy and an ideology, which is the only possible way to avert the climate crisis. So Allah Ta'ala tells us that there are two highways that He has shown us. And the first highway is the one of scarcity, that the solution is growth. But the Prophet ﷺ said that scarcity is a mindset. The true richness is contentment of the heart. And so it cannot be removed by having more and more. In fact, the opposite is true. The more you get, the more you desire. So instead of trying to buy more and more goods to reduce scarcity, you have to try to learn to be content with what you have. So where we stand as a whole is a very interesting quote of Keynes, which I have linked here. It is long, so I'm just going to summarize what it says. And basically what Keynes says is that pursuit of wealth is actually a psychological disease, because if you just go for money without using it, that's meaningless. I mean, you waste your life earning money and you die with it in the bank account. And that's actually also mentioned in hadith, that a man says that this is my wealth, but the wealth only belongs to him which he uses up actually, and the rest belongs to his heirs. But what Keynes says is that regardless of the fact that this is a psychological disease, we must infect people with this disease, because that will lead to production of wealth. If people are content with what they have, then they will not produce more goods and wealth will not accumulate. And he thinks that, he says explicitly, that once wealth accumulates and everybody has enough for all their needs and wants, then there will be an amazing change in people, because now they will be satisfied and content and happy, and then they will no longer do crimes, and they will become kind and generous and compassionate, because they don't need any more. So they will have enough, they will give to others. But he says that this time is not yet. Beware that we have to wait for a century or so, and we have to just let avarice and greed be our gods. So he says that make greed your god, because that will allow wealth to accumulate. Once we have enough wealth, then we can stop this, and we can afford to realize that greed is bad. So this is what Keynes said, and this is actually what the whole world is doing right now. If you look at all the world, the ministries of finance, the ministries of planning, the kings and the presidents and the prime ministers, they're all pursuing madly economic growth. And if some regime, some president, some prime minister achieves a high growth rate, he says that, good, I have done what was needed. If somebody does a low growth rate, then he's voted out. So, but actually, if you look at the data, economic growth has not led to prosperity. And actually, the opposite is true. And the solution to our economic problems does not lie in growth, it lies in degrowth. This is rather paradoxical and surprising, because we have been trained to believe otherwise. But we must reduce the amount of production if we want prosperity and welfare. And that's basically because what Islam teaches us, that scarcity is a mindset. It cannot be removed by growth. It only increases with growth. So today, the major item on the agenda, because people have recognized that growth is not working, it's causing a lot of harm. So they say that what we should do is sustainable development, that we should do growth because there's no alternative to growth. But what we need to do is to manage the harmful side effects. So this is trying to put a band-aid on the problems, but it will not work. What we need to do is rethink the entire economic model from the ground up, starting from the Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. He put the whole discipline on the wrong track. And the foundation to create such a radical change does not exist in Western intellectual tradition. They can only make patches. So it's up to us Muslims to provide these foundations, because it's a critical need of modern times and nobody else can do it. One thing to realize is that economics is a religion, and this is the religion which replaced Christianity. Although it claims that this is positive and factual, it claims to deliver knowledge free from doubt, but actually what is done is by taking the metaphysics and the morals and the personal beliefs and naming it as scientific methodology. So to a far greater extent than people realize, Samuelson's textbook on the foundations of economics created the modern discipline of economics. And Samuelson was actually a disciple of Keynes. So he had the same idea that we have to infect people with greed to create growth. Eventually, growth will solve the problems that we face. So one of the critical things to understand about this capitalist religion is that the Bible says that the love of money is the root of all evil, but capitalism says that lack of money is the root of all evil, and the accumulation of wealth is the solution to all problems facing mankind. In fact, because this accumulation of wealth is at the heart of capitalism, it's built on producing more and more, and getting people to labor more and more to produce. And with this extra labor, they get income, and this income they buy goods. So this is a complete trap. You are caught in a cycle of laboring to produce useless goods and earning income to buy useless goods. So everybody is just caught in this vicious cycle in which you keep doing more and more things for the sake of nothing. Those extra goods get you nothing in terms of pleasure, and you have to labor very hard to get them. So you basically end up wasting your lives. But all the economic statistics show that something good is happening. GNP is increasing, so welfare is increasing, which is actually false. So Islam offers us the opposite perspective. Making accumulation of wealth the goal is the source of all our current problems. And once we understand this, then we can get to the place where we can recommend degrowth as the way to go for the future. So let me describe a personal experience which led me to the understanding that I had been brainwashed by capitalism, like everyone is, that money is the source of all our problems. So in 1980, one of the elders of Tabligh was giving a talk in the New York Markaz, and he talked about idol worship. He said that, you guys think that you are very smart, and that the people of Mecca, they they created these idols with their own hands, and then they started worshiping them. How stupid. So I said, yes, of course, this is true. They were very stupid. He then took out a dollar bill and he said that, look, we have printed this piece of paper by our own hands, but you believe, and he sort of looked at me, at least it felt to me like he was looking at me. You believe that if you have this, you will be happy and content and secure, and people will respect you and admire you. If you don't have this, then no one will respect you. You will be hungry, you will be insecure, you will not be able to enjoy a happy life. And so I looked into my heart and I said, yes, I have all of these beliefs. So he said, what's the difference between you and the idol worshippers? So I said, this is true, that I think that the source of my contentment and happiness. So that is what started my engagement with Tabligh. And I realized that this feeling in my heart that the wealth is the solution to all my problems is wrong. And this is something that I have been taught to believe, but I must undo this. I must cleanse my heart. Otherwise, it will not be good. So the father economics, he said that wealth of nations is the key, and how the whole book is about how nations can create wealth. And that is actually the perspective of the colonizer of the world, that they were looting the world to acquire wealth. But what is the perspective of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And he says that Allah Ta'ala didn't give me this message to accumulate wealth. He said that you should make the praise of Allah and make sajda and worship, and until the death comes. The Quran says clearly that the pursuit of wealth is not the solution. That if someone has wealth and sons, this doesn't mean that Allah Ta'ala likes him or that he has achieved prosperity. And of course, Allazi jama'a ma'alan wa'addadah. Allah Ta'ala gives the examples of Fir'aun and Qarun to show that power and wealth are not the desired goals to strive for. One of the things that Keynes said and thought, and very many people believe, that if we have a lot of money, then we will stop, then we will be content, and we will become generous, and we will be happy. But and so that will solve the problem of scarcity. But the Quran tells us that this is not true. That people think, this is very explicit, that people think that if we have enough wealth, then we will give sadaqah from it. But actually, when they get more, they do not do this. They cling to it and they ask for even more. And so the Islamic solution to our problems is rather unique and different. And it says that we should fulfill our needs, but we should not go for our wants. Needs are rather broadly defined and they are limited, and so they can be fulfilled. Wants are unlimited and they expand upon fulfillment. So it's impossible to satisfy wants. So the goal that of economics, that we want to satisfy all needs and wants, this is impossible, and trying to satisfy wants creates unhappiness instead of unhappiness. So the Islamic solution to the problem that our wants are unlimited is to prohibit these wants. Learn to be content with what you have, and if you do that, you will get rich and fulfilling lives. So to be a little bit clearer, needs are defined generously. Islam does not tell us for about rahbaniyat. It doesn't say that you should live in a cave and have minimal standards. It says no, be comfortable, eat, drink, even wear your beautiful clothes. So we are allowed for needs, we are allowed for comforts, we are allowed for beautification, but no israf, no tabzir, no conspicuous consumption. This is the most important, that we buy things in order to make other people jealous of us, or we buy things because everybody else has them, so we want them too. Capitalism depends on this excess consumption. And we are all trained in capitalism. So all of us have bought things which we never used. We purchased them from the store and we put them somewhere thinking that we will use them. And eventually we threw them away without ever using them. So that's israf. So Allah Ta'ala teaches us that those who are preferring the life of the world, they will find hellfire. And those who prefer, those who fear Allah will prevent ourselves from idle desires. So we are not supposed to pursue our wants. And that is part of the what we have to do to gain paradise. So pursuit of idle desires is prohibited in so many different verses that I could not gather them all. But some of the ones are, the one of the clear verses about Israf and Tabzir, that these are brothers of Shaitan. And so that's very harsh condemnation of Israf and Tabzir. And there's a very interesting verse that, very interesting verse in the Quran, that because this world is meaningless, the pursuit, the gold and silver that we think is so important is just completely meaningless, completely useless. Allah Ta'ala says, I would have made these houses of the unbelievers of gold and silver. But the problem is that because Allah Ta'ala has put the love of Allah, of these things in our hearts, He said that everybody would have said, oh, who has seen the heaven? Let's enjoy gold and let's disbelieve so that we can get this gold and silver. Allah Ta'ala says this is only a temporary, short-lived enjoyment, and the real and permanent gain is in the akhirah. So it is said clearly that if you have a valley of gold, you will want another one. So clearly the economist's solution is completely ridiculous. The idea that, if somebody has wants, you fulfill these wants. It doesn't lead to satisfaction. It doesn't lead to satiation. If you give every man everything he needs, then he starts asking for more and more. So nothing will fill our desires except the dust of the grave. So there is a survey that they took a survey of millionaires and asked, do you think that you are wealthy? And only 13% of these people classified them as wealthy. And many, I don't remember the percentage, thought that they were heading for a financial crisis. They were very unhappy with their financial status. So having $1 million is not enough to create satisfaction. So basically, the economist idea, which is being currently pursued by the whole world, that the problem of scarcity can be solved by growth, is simply false. It doesn't work. So one of the most important discoveries of the past few decades is the Easterlin paradox, which comes at the same issue, but instead of supporting it from the Quran, we use empirical evidence. So he finds that massive increases in wealth did not lead to increase in human welfare. If we take this seriously, then the whole of this discipline becomes completely destroyed. We have to just throw Adam Smith into the dustbin and rebuild economics. And this is what we need to do: rewrite the wealth of nations. And basically, is what Islam teaches us: the wealth of nations is the people, the human beings. They are the most important of the creation. One life is worth all of humanity. So that is where we have to focus our efforts if we follow an Islamic approach. As Ghazali said, there's enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. So if we pay attention to satisfaction of needs and prohibit fulfillment of desire, there would be no scarcity. Food supplies per capita have been rising over the past 2 centuries, for which we have data. They are more than enough to feed everyone on the planet. Even if you isolate continents and look at Africa, which is the worst in terms of food, the food supply per capita in Africa itself is enough to feed everyone in Africa. Today, the cosmetic industry of the world has enough revenue to end hunger on the planet. And the US defense budget is sufficient to provide for basic needs of all humans on the planet. So what this means is that what we have in terms of productive capacity is enough to provide for the needs of everyone on this planet. So there's no scarcity. But what is not recognized is the critical teaching of Islam, that there is a right in the wealth of the rich for the poor. And this is beyond zakat to whatever is necessary to provide for them. So this is the critical teaching of Islam, which is not understood, not recognized not acknowledged by economics. That anybody who has more than what he needs, some proportion of this wealth should be used to fulfill the needs of others. 2.5% is the minimum, but actually whatever is needed. And if this simple thing was implemented, and many people from secular grounds have recognized this, Piketty, for example, and many others, that what we need is a wealth tax. If we just say that, okay, you can have billions, but just make sure that to wipe out hunger on the planet, do your part. I mean, give them a proportion that, okay, the total needs of the hungry are so much. It's not too much. The figures slip my mind right now. It's something like $150 billion or something like that. Some trivial amount for the major players in the game. And so if we just say, okay, take the top 10 billionaires and ask them to pool money to wipe out hunger, they can do it. So the idea that scarcity is the problem is just a trap, is just a blindfold. It makes us look in the wrong direction. Instead of looking to the source, which is the greed and accumulation by the top, the wealthiest, and that's precisely where they don't want us to look. They say, okay, we don't have enough. Let's try to grow some more food and grow some more products. But when they do, all of that surplus ends up in the pockets of the already wealthy. So Eastern paradox, let me just go a little bit more into it, but details are available easily from the literature. What he did was he analyzed time series data. So he looked at the USA and other countries for which data was available. And he said that, life standards have increased so much that the average person lives like the princes used to live 100 years ago. But does this mean that the society has increased in happiness? He was surprised to find that the answer is no. One of his papers is entitled, Does Money Buy Happiness? And he comes to the conclusion, no. Similarly, in a cross section, you look at countries at the same period of time, and you find that Cuba, which had income level of 1/10 of that of USA, had roughly similar level of happiness. So there was no correlation between GNP and happiness. And so basically, that's what Islam teaches us, that wealth cannot buy happiness, and there's no increase in welfare due to the pursuit of idle desires. It's useful to understand why the Easterlin paradox occurs. And basically, one key is to understand that, yes, if I fulfill somebody's needs, if somebody's hungry and I feed him, that does increase welfare. But if somebody wants to listen to music and we fulfill that want, that doesn't lead to increase of welfare. Why not? There are two things which operate. One is habituation. Once you get used to a certain standard of living, then that becomes your new normal. Now, when you get it, that doesn't make you happy. It's just what is normal. But if you don't get it, you become unhappy. Initially, if you don't have air conditioning and you get it, you become very happy. But later on, you expect air conditioning as the norm. And now when you go out of your house you feel unhappy. So the other thing is relativity or social comparison. When you get the first car in your neighborhood, you feel very happy because you have something nobody else has. But when everybody else gets them, then it no longer gives you happiness. So the problem is, so it's consumption is like a drug addiction. You consume a little bit and it makes you happy temporarily, but then you get used to it, and now you must get the same level of consumption to live a normal life. And if you don't get that, you become unhappy. So, but as you increase your standard of living, you have to have you have to labor harder. You have to work more to maintain that level. So in order to, and earlier you had a low standard of living, you didn't have to work so hard. But now you have a high standard of living and you must maintain it. You must maintain it because if you don't, you will become extremely unhappy. So it's just like drug addiction. What Galbraith says is that the urgent wants, the thing we really need, must originate from within us. If they are created, they cannot be urgent. And there is no justification to manufacture goods to satisfy non-urgent needs, because what happens in an industrial society, he says, is that manufacture is far in excess of needs, and therefore it also manufactures the demand for this excess. So in technical terms in economics, consumption creates a negative externality. Yes, you get happy, but everybody else who sees you becomes unhappy because they don't have what you have. And so the value of this excess, it's a very strong negative thing. So actually, people who have studied it from completely secular grounds have said that people who have completely secular grounds, they have said that we should ban excess consumption. We should make sure that everybody has a simple standard of living, because if somebody tries to increase the standard of living, one person gets more, but thousands of people get unhappy. So it's a very strong negative externality. So now that's the theoretical foundation for degrowth. And I will go somewhat more into this a bit later. But now I want to study the history of capitalism, which was actually the period when this idea of growth started. So basically, we had static societies. Self-sufficiency was the norm everywhere. That's what we want in a society, that we want to be able to fulfill our needs. The goal of life is not to consume or to produce. The goal of life is to pursue higher achievements, like spirituality is but literary achievement, athletics, many other things, art, socialization, that's the most important, making friends. These are the goals of life, not the pursuit of wealth. So what happened? How did pursuit of wealth started? Looking at the history of this is very instructive, because this history is not displayed uh, in your textbooks, and it's not displayed in the common histories that we read of the European civilization, because those are very Eurocentric, and they display only the virtues of the European society. So it all got started with the triangular trade from 1600 to 1800, where basically guns and manufactures were sent from Europe to Africa, and slaves were purchased in Africa and transported across to the Americas. This was called the Middle Passage, and it's one of the most horrifying pieces of history in all of recorded history. Agricultural products produced by these slaves were shipped to Europe. It's an interesting footnote that part of the reason for the development was that strong Islamic empires blocked European access to Asia. So what was the consequence of this triangular trade? The Europeans became very wealthy, but African societies were destroyed. Lots of African kingdoms, cultures, nations, they no longer exist. Similarly, millions of Native Americans, we can't really count how many there were. There were whole societies and cultures. They were just completely destroyed. So this was, Europeans became rich, so the wealth of nations did accumulate in the nations of Europe. But would we say that this is progress? If you look at the Africans and Native Americans, you say that this is the catastrophe. Maybe if you think of it from Adam Smithian perspective, then you could call it progress, although we are going to question that a little bit later. But let's take that for the moment, that, okay, pursuit of the Europeans' progress. Even then, if you add up the numbers and look at it from the world perspective, you will not count this as progress. You will count this as degeneration. So what does the Quran teaches us about this matter? So is it progress to increase your wealth by destroying societies and killing millions and enslaving millions? Well, I think any human being would answer the same way, but Allah Ta'ala specifically says, "La yughurrannaka taqallubul lazina kafaru fil bilad." So we should not be deceived by, the pride and pomposity and the glory that that European wealth brings to them. This is only a temporary gain, and in the Akhirah they will be punished for what they did. Now let's look a little bit more closely at the question, was this progress for Europeans? Well, those who have studied it said that this act, the horrible and inhuman acts that were done to Africans, killing millions and enslaving millions, had a very bad effect on the colonizer. It basically dehumanized them. They had to believe that these human beings are not human, and otherwise they wouldn't be able to sleep. But they were aware Every nafs knows what it does. They were aware that this is a rationalization. So they had to actually deaden their hearts to the pain of others. But what happens when you deaden your heart to the pain of others is that your heart really becomes dead. And you are unable to feel pleasure also. And this happened to the society as a whole, that because of uh, failure to feel the pain of other human beings, uh, the hearts of the colonizers became deeply damaged. So, uh, to avoid this and actually to overcome the loss that came from losing Christianity, the myth of progress was manufactured. Uh, the Europeans defined progress as accumulation of wealth, not as becoming better people. And this is part of the religion of economics, that if we have more money, then we are better off and we are progressing. And so when you use this metric, then you see that there has been a lot of progress in Europe. Although um, there are many ways to counter this idea and to explain that even when you count wealth, if you count the gross wealth, the wealth that people have and the wealth that they have destroyed in order to get this wealth that they have, then the net comes out heavily negative. What has been destroyed to produce this wealth is much larger than the wealth that has been produced. But anyway, the myth of progress is very strongly rooted in the Eurocentric tradition, and we have also come to believe in it. And this is critical. If we want to decolonize our minds, we need to learn that Europeans did not make progress. And this is hard to do because we have spent years and years of our lives learning to believe that this is progress, what Europeans have been doing. But for a Muslim, it's very easy to understand that this is not progress, because there is a very clear and simple and explicit hadith that the best of times is my time, and then after that, and then after that. So it's obvious that the Prophet ﷺ lived in the best of times, and there was not much wealth there. And so wealth is not the criteria of progress, and nobody can ever achieve the level of goodness that was present at the time of the Prophet and at the time of the Khulafai Rashidin. So we can say that uh, there has been no progress. It has been up and down, but progress cannot be. The Quran says that uh, the best of the people Sullatum min al-awwalin wa qalilun min al-akhirin, that the best of people will be a lot in the early times, but few in the later times. So the later times are worse because we have few of the best people. So this critical difference, that capitalism measures our progress by the goods we have, whereas Islam measures progress by the level of the character of the people. So when you look at what happens in a consumer surplus, we have culture. We have today the opioid crisis. People have been in the USA, where people manufacture painkillers which are addictive for massive profits, but this has also led to massive increase in addiction, death, and other health hazards, just for the sake of profits. Similarly, on the worldwide basis, Nestle has been advertising their uh, milk powdered formula, knowing that this will lead to millions of deaths. So just like the slave trade, this thing is going on today. Iraq and Libya and Syria have been destroyed for the sake of corporate profits. And this is known and acknowledged. So this idea that profits is the goal leads to tremendous damage, and it's a false accounting where you count the money but you don't count the number of people killed to make this money. That leads to the illusion that we are making progress. So Islam gives us a lot of tools to counter this consumer culture. Allah Ta'ala tells us that yes, the things of this world have been made desirable. Our hearts are attracted to them. But Allah Ta'ala has the best things. And this is actually because the life of this world is a test. If we did not have these desires, there would be no test. We would be like angels, and we would not feel attracted to these things. So this attraction is a necessary part of the test. But Allah Ta'ala tells us that there are two paths, that we have shown them the two highways, and we have shown them the path, and they can choose to be grateful or they can choose to be kafur. So let whoever wants to, let them choose the path to Allah. So the strategy that we need to follow is that we must not prefer the worldly life, and we must prefer the akhirah, because akhirah is infinite. The worldly life is just a moment. And we must choose the akhirah, the success of the akhirah, over the success of this world. We must recognize that the pleasure of this world is an illusion. It seems like a lot, but even those who get these pleasures, they get momentary satisfaction, and then they find that it turns to dust, just like the example. I myself remember that I thought that getting a degree from MIT would be the final success and I would have succeeded. But after I got it, I realized that, oh, a bachelor's is nothing and I have to get a master's, and then master's and then PhD. At every stage, I was thinking that once I do that, I will be the king of the world. But after accomplishing it, I said, oh, this is nothing. This is just the start. So it's like this. This world is an illusion. Alhaakumut takasuru hatta zurtumul maqabir. We just keep thinking a little bit more and I will succeed. And then when you get that little bit more, you find that it is not success. It is just temporary and partial. So this is the way with all worldly accomplishments. When you don't have it, it looks very attractive. When you have it, it turns to dust. And Allah Ta'ala teaches us that this life is short and temporary. Be in this world like a stranger or wayfarer. So now you see, Islamic economics is not a theory in the books. If we want to implement Islamic economics, we have to start with our lives. We have to be Islamic economics, which means implementing these things in our lives. So in the evening, don't expect to think that this life is temporary. And so don't work hard for it. Instead, work hard for the akhirah. And one of the key strategies for cleansing our hearts of the love of this dunya is to spend what we love the most. Today, we don't love the consumer goods as much as we love our screen time. So what this is saying that sacrifice that and learn to read the Quran and do zikr and ibadah. And this comes as very, very hard to the nafs. So there are strategies which our elders have recommended that, okay, don't say that, okay, from now on, I take an oath never to watch TV again, because you won't be able to do it. So instead, calculate that, okay, I watch 6 hours or I spend 6 hours on pleasure. So how much of that can you give up? Maybe you can say that, okay, I can do with 5 and I will make 1 hour and use it for ibadah. And then again, there's a lot of different types of ibadah. You can even watch videos Abdul Hakim Murad and other leaders. So you can be nice to your nafs, because if you are too harsh on it, it will rebel, and it is very strong. You have fed it so much that it is so powerful that you cannot resist it. So you have to trick it. You have to go slow and spend a little bit, enough that it and make it agreeable. So choose among the worships the easy ones, and reduce it gradually, and make sure that you take steps that you can maintain, instead of taking a big step and then coming back. So one of the things that we need to learn is that Allah Ta'ala tells us that one life is worth the entire humanity. So this is just in potential. So learn how we can live so that our life is worth equivalent to all of humanity in the eyes of Allah. We should understand that we are not like that right now, but it is possible for us to achieve that goal, because Allah Ta'ala has said that this potential lies within all of us. So how can we live so that we become precious in the eyes of Allah? Allah Ta'ala says that we have created the man in the best of forms. It means that man can be higher than the angels. He can be made sajda to by the angels, but he can also be the worst of the beasts. So make a self-evaluation. Where do you stand in this continuum? Are we worse than beasts, or are we higher than angels? Most people are somewhere in the middle. There is 3 stages of progress. Nafs ammara, which is exactly Homo economicus, by the way. Nafs ammara is exactly Homo economics, and economic theory is the theory of Homo economicus, or Nafs ammara. Most of us are beyond that. Even within the West, even the atheists, they are more like Nafs lawwama. Although I think there was a survey which showed that about 10% people have become Nafs ammara. It used to be less, but now, because of the preaching of economic theory all over the world, you see a lot of Nafs ammara, like even 10%. But most people are somewhere in the middle in Nafs lawwama. So we have to think about how we can move from Nafs lawwama to Nafs mutmainnah. And the goal of a society is to provide a nurturing environment for spiritual progress. And this is very different from the goal of an economic society of Adam Smith to accumulate wealth. In fact, accumulation of wealth is an obstacle and hindrance, because when we do that, then we don't have time to pursue the things which matter. So the Quran teaches us actually this is hadith, that wealth, it's not that we reject wealth. We are not rahibs. But if our heart doesn't have the love of wealth, then we can, then if wealth comes from Allah, then it is a blessing for us. But if we are greedy, we seek after wealth and we try to acquire it, then it does not bring barakah. So this is very difficult teaching. It requires work to rid our heart of the love of wealth. And basically, it is the love of wealth which is the root of evil. But this needs work. Now, the Quran teaches us that wealth and poverty are both trials from Allah Ta'ala. Wealth is not desirable fi nafsihi, for itself. And similarly, poverty is also not desirable fi nafsihi, because it's a trial. So how can we succeed in the trial by wealth? If we use the wealth, first of all, if we acquire wealth by halal means instead of haram means, not by colonization. If we acquire wealth by halal means, and then we spend it in the way that Allah Ta'ala wants us to spend it, which means that spend on those who need. And if I have more than what I need, then I should be spending it on needs of others rather than my own wants. Capitalism teaches us precisely the opposite lesson. When you have more than what you need, spend on your own wants, increase your own wants. So we see the effects of this message everywhere. In Pakistan, for example, when I was growing up, it would have been impossible to spend 1,000 rupees on a meal, even inflation adjusted, because just there was nothing like that available. But today, you can spend 10,000, 20,000 on eating a meal in a fine restaurant, because as people acquire money, they are also given consumption opportunities. You can buy $50,000 handbags when $1 will feed a person, and you could have fed 50,000 hungry, malnourished children. But capitalism says, no, don't worry about that. You won't have any information about that. Just buy your handbag. So Allah Ta'ala says that we should use our wealth to purchase the Jannah. Now, if you once you understand Easterlin paradox, that consumption doesn't buy us happiness, then secular economists, not economists, but happiness theorists, turn to the study of what actually does lead to long-run happiness. And they came up with very old answers. Basically, it's two things: character and social relationships. This is secular. Otherwise, from an Islamic point of view, it's really our relationship with God, which is central. But from the secular perspective, character depends on certain traits like gratitude, contentment, trust, which we have mentioned, and social relationships, loving and being loved. A believer loves and he is loved. So these are the basis for long-term happiness. Capitalism actually destroys these bases because it promotes hedonism, and it promotes the illusion that happiness comes from consumption. This is what's written in all economics textbooks. But actually, the family is the primary source of happiness for most people. And this has been destroyed in the West. More than 50% of the children born today in the West are born to single mothers. This is, unfortunately, this culture of individualism and hedonism is spreading rapidly to the Islamic countries, and there is no awareness. I mean, people are fighting all sorts of battles in the Islamic world, but the main battle to be fought is to protect and preserve the family and the community, and to build social relationships. I have a previous lecture, lecture 6, on this. So how can we fail in the trial by wealth? Well, if we puff up with pride and we think that this is because of I did it, then we can, and then we use this wealth to oppress others. That is when wealth becomes a curse for us, not a blessing. And so one of the major problems that we face today is because of shock and awe of West, we are following them in all directions without thinking that this following is against the message of the Quran. And so to undo this shock and awe, we just need to look at the true history of European colonization. Anyone who reads this true history will simply realize that this is not a path we should follow. They are not a people that we should respect. So I'm going to go over this very quickly because time is up, but there is this book, King Leopold's Ghost, which documents the most horrible crimes committed in human history, where it's so horrifying that there is a movie about this and a book, but only people with very strong stomachs and hearts would be advised to read this. It's just too horrible. Then there is the slavery in the Middle Patches, where millions and millions of Africans were transported from the coasts of Africa to the coasts of the Americas. And this was enormously, the conditions of these voyages are just unmentionable. And this is now coming out, and there are books and articles and documents, but this is very, very again, these are books that are so gruesome, so horrifying that it's hard to read for anyone who has a heart. This history of the British Empire by Elkins shows that although they pretended to be fair and just, they used an enormous amount of violence to protect and preserve their empire, and they left a legacy of violence. They were so routine in using this violence that this became the pattern in the colonies afterwards as well. You can't find any example of the kind of violence that has been done in Islamic history. We didn't. Any killing is there, but torturing and doing it ruthlessly and enjoying this is simply not available except in the colonial history, where they treated human beings like animals and beasts. And this has led to what Elkins says is that the current violence that we see around the world is just a legacy of the British Empire, because they did it everywhere. So everyone else learned that this is how we should behave. The Opium Wars is related to the economics. China was a self-sufficient economy. They didn't want any goods. But the British wanted a lot of Chinese goods, and they had to pay in silver, which they couldn't afford. So what they did was they did war, China forbade the sales of opium. So they made war on China in order to allow the trading of opium, and created a massive addict population within China, which didn't exist. And then they were able to sell opium and get money from the Chinese so that they could finance their purchases. So this idea that trade is mutually beneficial, this is simply wrong. This is not how it works. Basically, you create needs which were not there, and then you fulfill them. And this just leads to a cycle of violence and useless production and useless consumption. British colonialism killed millions in India. There are so many gruesome stories. One of them is that they forced the farmers in Bengal to produce export crops so that they could purchase them, and they prevented them from producing food which they would use to eat. And as a result, millions of people died in the Bengal famine, which was created by the British. And then they set up a commission of inquiry to ask how it happened. And this commission found that absolved the British of the blame. So I'm going over time, but we don't need to. Basically, the thing to do is to look at what happens to the hearts. So when the hearts commit these crimes, they become hard, and they become blind. They cannot see the reality of what a human being is. So you see, if you look at this economic theory, Homo economicus, that the purpose of our life is to maximize our consumption, you should laugh at this. How can any sensible person even think such a thing, let alone write it and teach it and read it and believe it? It's just completely ridiculous and absurd. So the only answer is that their hearts have become blind to the reality of what a human being is. And summa qasat qulubuhum, their hearts have become hard like stones. And that's why they make these theories. These hearts are unable to connect to human beings. So they are, for economists for 50 years, they've been trying to understand why human beings cooperate with each other. When they have a chance to betray the other guy, to put the knife in his back, they don't do it, even though it will bring them $1 million. Why not? Economists have been puzzling about this for decades, and they still are no closer to a solution. And the solution is simply that the economists have blind hearts. And so now we are beginning to see the emergence of Islamic psychology. So there's Abdullah Rathman and Coyle. There's an article which is available, which discusses a model, Islamic model of the soul. There is a book by him, and there are other approaches to this. But basically, we have a ruh which attracts towards the good. We have a nafs which attracts towards the evil. And so our hearts are a battleground for good and evil. And this is the central battle that we face in our lives. And if we do tazkiyah of our nafs, and then we can train it to like good. And that is the central battle in our lives. Now, our minds have been conditioned by Orientalism that because Europeans colonized us, they came to believe that they are superior. We came to believe that we are inferior. And this is the main problem that we face, because we are in shock and awe of Western theories, and we are not even looking at the Quran. So very strangely, when I was preparing for this lecture, I was looking at some articles by Islamic economists, and these people are just saying that, yes, growth is good, utility maximization good. Quran has no objections to pursuit of pleasure of the nafs. It says that we love the shahwatum min an-nisa. So obviously, Islam has no objections to pursuit of pleasure. All sort of ridiculous things, which just the thing is not that the West is saying them. The West has to say them because they reject the akhirah. The strange thing is that Muslim economists are right now in Muslim schools teaching these absurd and ridiculous theories which are against the Quran to Muslim students. So Eurocentrism conflicts directly with Islam because the Quran says, and it's obvious intuitively, that the message of God to mankind must be superior to any knowledge that can be generated by human minds. And so what I'm trying to show here is that the economic theory which the West has developed for over 300 years is harmful to mankind. It's absurd and ridiculous. It's easily rejected. And Islamic teachings provide us a far superior approach. And basically, it comes from, we must start from looking at our purpose. All knowledge has to be related to our purpose. And the purpose is, Allah Ta'ala has told us, is to do good deeds and to make sure that everything we do is for the sake of Allah. So now we come to the important question. What about the non-Muslims? Because so far I have taken as my audience as Muslims because I've been using the Quran, etc. So I have studied this issue very carefully, and I have tried in both ways, and I've come to the conclusion that we must follow a two-stage process. Yes, the message of Islam is for all mankind. It is not restricted to Muslims only. But first, we must work among ourselves. We must work to become models of Islamic behavior. Then only we can spread the message to others. If the Islamic world is corrupt and if the Islamic world is pursuing growth, then we cannot tell to non-Muslims that you should pursue degrowth while we are ourselves pursuing growth. So in the first instance, and so there have to be two messages. We cannot, if we try to abandon the Quran and give the message of degrowth on secular grounds, it will lack the foundations that are needed. So we need to work on the Muslims first. But the same message can be given to non-Muslims. It is possible to redo this whole lecture and make it attractive to non-Muslims because Allah Ta'ala has told us that the hearts of every human being have been implanted with the knowledge of God. So recognition of God is built into our hearts for all human beings. And so the life of this world is a test. And one thing, see, part of most of this lecture is to try to teach us how we should impact on our life experiences. Knowledge is what teaches us how to live. If you learn chemistry, biology, and it doesn't teach you how to live better, then it's useless knowledge. And it is something which Allah Ta'ala, Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam sought protection from. So it is a test. We face different tests. Different people face, some people face very difficult tests. So in this connection, there are two promises of Allah. One is that the people who are facing difficult tests, Allah Ta'ala will give them the resources to be able to uh, succeed in the test. No one is tested beyond his capabilities. And also Allah Ta'ala tells us that he will adjust our grades according to the level of the difficulty of the test. And so we are coming to the end of this lecture. What is the nature of this test? Well, on the one hand, it's actions. We should know how to act, but knowing how to act is based on knowledge. And so the first revelation is all about knowledge. It's about read. He taught mankind what they did not know. But knowing refers to knowledge of the path to God, how we can get to Allah Ta'ala. فَمَنْ شَاءَ اتَّخَذَ إِلَى رَبِّهِ سَبِيلًا. So the وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. So when the angels complained about how man will do fitna and fasad, the answer was that Adam alayhi salam will have knowledge, and that is knowledge will make him superior. So it's all about knowledge. We have to acquire knowledge. The problem with us today is that our brains have been washed, and we have been filled these brains with wrong types of Eurocentric knowledge. There are several levels of knowledge, and Rajab Shanturk has very good lectures on the Islamic theories of knowledge, which are multi-leveled. In Western theory, there is just good and bad. There's just true and false. This binary theory is completely inadequate for a realistic conception of human knowledge. And so we need to look at our heritage to learn knowledge, and that is part of this knowledge is an Islamic approach to economics. So I've come to the end of my lecture, and all right, so I think that we are ready for some questions. All right. So yes, somebody has asked in the chat about how to get the slides. Well, basically the website for the course, which I have given the link to earlier, will contain the slides for the lecture eventually. I will put them up soon. Even in this slide, there was a link to the slides. In fact, I think I can put it up. I have the link. So please raise hand and ask any questions. What was this lecture? Needs, wants, and scarcity. Yes. So this is the link for the slides which I've just put on. All right. So are there any questions by anybody?
Actually, there are several questions in the chat box, Prof.
All right. Can you
yes.
ask me?
What kind of mindset for entrepreneurs with creating products so we don't intentionally create ones? That is first.
The mindset for entrepreneurs. Yes. Actually, entrepreneurship is a very important part of Islam because Hadith emphasizes that, and this is actually relevant to a very important issue, that the idea that is put into our minds is that we should become job seekers. But every job seeker is actually part of the capitalist web. So we should be looking for ways to escape this web and to create our own living and to create our own business, so that and this business should be based on well, there are many approaches to this, but we should learn, in view of the approaching climate catastrophe, we should learn to create communities, agrarian communities, which grow their own food and energy and basically attempt to be as self-sufficient as possible with minimal amount of trades and minimal amount of market. So Recep Şentürk is the name of the Turkish scholar who will implement the Islamic ideology. Islamic ideology, we will implement it, you and I. Allah Ta'ala has not given us priests who will be leaders, but actually it puts the responsibility for the deen on the shoulders of every single person. Yes, Islamic sustainable development, that's when you talk about sustainable development, you're saying that we're going to do growth, but we're going to try to make sure that the growth is self-sustaining, so it doesn't do climatic damage. So this kind of approach can work and it can fail. And yes, of course, the recording will be put on the website for the course eventually, probably tomorrow or day after. All recordings for all lectures are available. Pastoral. Any other questions, Lisa, from the past?
Yes, from Dr. Abdullah. So if Muslims choose to prioritize their needs over the desired, would this mean that they would neither experience relative scarcity nor absolute scarcity? And he also asks about the reason behind the relative scarcity.
Yeah, yes, if we choose to prioritize needs and we also practice social responsibility. If somebody in our neighborhood does not have enough for their needs, we collectively provide for them. Then there would be no scarcity, neither absolute nor relative. This concept of relative scarcity was invented by Islamic economists because they wanted to find a halfway point. They didn't want to reject scarcity, but they also didn't want to reject Fazlullah. But this compromise is exactly what the problem is. We don't make compromises with the West.
Maybe we can go to those who have raised hand. There are Brother Hasib.
I don't see any hands on the screen.
Brother Hasib, maybe you can.
Oh, okay, yeah. Let me change the view so that. Okay, I see a lot of hands now.
Yes.
I was in the wrong view. All right, so Daniel.
Sir, Assalamu alaikum, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sir. If you see within the Western tradition and lately the tradition which they follow, they do have critical scholarship, and their scholars do identify these problems such as greed, hedonistic pursuit of happiness, and myth of progress, all of these things.
Yes.
And as a solution to these problems, they provide a solution which they call workplace democracy. I mean, in the form of cooperatives.
This is the first time I've heard of it, but go ahead. Yes.
Okay. So, or maybe I've understood it wrong. So the thing is, I wanted to understand how do you conceive cooperatives and what is the Islamic point of view towards cooperatives? Because cooperatives do enable the workers to own the corporation, to own the business entity, but then, they're also enmeshed within that discourse of myth of progress and, increasing wealth and all of that. So
exactly. I said that, first of all, the mainstream education is the source of shaping of minds. And so in the mainstream economics, I haven't seen any mention of cooperatives anywhere. So basically the minds are, now there are radicals, there are heterodox economists. I'm one of them. And but nobody is listening to them. So what they say or what they don't say doesn't matter. It's not on the world stage. But even if world was to start to listen to these heterodoxies, to cooperatives, first of all, there's lots of examples of failed cooperatives, as in Russia and in many other places as well. they don't have in the West, the intellectual foundations, the ideological foundation on which to build a cooperative society, because they've been studying for too long the idea of that we are just animals, products of evolution, and the state of nature is competition and survival of the fittest. And so to rebuild this whole structure, the foundations on which all of the social sciences is constructed, is too much work. So we can't build on those foundations. We need to build on Islamic foundation. Then we can create an example. And once we have an example, other people will be able to follow. Ashar Saeed. Oh. Yes.
Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
So my question is that I'm a homeschooling mother, and I'm trying to come up with a curriculum for children, which is like we talked about, ilm nafi, which helps children in gaining knowledge, which is actually beneficial knowledge. So I'm working on different aspects like the Sira and Allama Iqbal and the world history, things that make sense, things that benefit. So Islamic economics is one of my, it has been on my mind for very long. And I'm trying to come up with, because and right now I'm looking at the mainstream books. For example, if you look at the O-levels business studies book, or the A-levels psychology book, I've been going through this. I know students who are studying this. So they all focus on, even, a book on psychology, A-level psychology will only focus on the psychological behavior of consumers and how to enhance motivation in order for, workers to, work efficiently for a capitalist society. So my question is, how do we, if we were to work on a curriculum, how do we incorporate Islamic economics in our curriculum for children? Where do we start from? So I'm looking at the Sira, and I want to understand that from the Sira, what points do we focus on so that we incorporate this aspect of Islamic economics into our children's curriculum from a very young age, so that it does not become something extremely strange to them when they are in their teens. That's my question. I don't know if I'm clear or not.
Yes, that's perfectly clear, and that's really an excellent question. And basically, let me say that the materials we need do not exist, and they have to be made up. If you look at the standard texts, first of all, when you talk about O-level, A-level, then of course, these are all secular, and they are not only highly unsuitable, they are actually antithetical to Islamic purposes. They teach LGBTQ, for example. And
exactly.
And in fact, that's one of the reasons for homeschooling, that you can't avoid this toxin. But even if you look at the Islamic alternative, you look at the textbook of Islamic economics that are available, they don't really do a good job at all. I think even in my own past work, I have focused a lot on critiques, but not so much on developing the Islamic alternative. Now, this set of lectures, which I'm currently preparing, this starts from building on Islamic foundations. And this is the first time. I've been working on this for 20 years, and finally I've gotten to this stage where I think that I have something which is usable. So I think what you can do is, if you look at my lectures on my website, and a lot of this material is translatable to things that would be understood by children from a very young age, like learning to be gratitude, making shukr to Allah for the gifts that He has given, learning to have qanaat, learning not to be consumer, learning to trust in Allah for our future. And these are characteristics which can be taught, and these are the fundamentals. But yes, this is a critical issue for the Muslims today. Yes.
I was looking at book that the Islamic economics, a polar opposite to capitalist economics. I think that's your
Yeah.
book. So I was just looking at that, and I was wondering, would that be helpful for
No,
me?
that was written about 15 years ago, and it's
Oh,
very sophisticated, very intellectual, not at all suitable for children, and hard to read for even adults. So, but the current set of lectures is different.
right. So, is the content of the book not aligned with these lectures? Are they not
The
completely
lectures are based on the book, but they are much simplified, and that
right?
book itself was written for a secular audience. It was addressed to a
Ah,
secular audience, so it was
all
not
right,
built for this. This set of lectures is meant only for a Muslim audience. It's built
right.
directly on the Quran. And
Thank you so much. That helps me so much. Thank you.
okay, so Yaqub Rashid. Yes,
Audible?
yes, I can hear you.
Actually, I want to ask you a question. That what I have learned from this lecture today, actually strongly agree with this thing. But what I felt is like this all the counter philosophical argument against the capitalist society or the capitalist economic system. But what I feel is the need of an hour is not to give a counter philosophical argument, or rather than to build a models like we have in capitalist economics or mainstream economics, which we are currently studying. Like we have mathematical, we have descriptive modeling there. The need of an hour should be like our approach should be more like aligned towards this path, so that like the earlier question asked by some sister, so that we can formulate simpler textbooks, like we are just studying in from standard 11 standard 12, so we can develop that form of modeling approach, like we have microeconomics macroeconomics, so we could align with this mainstream argument.
Well, I think that trying to align has been the problem, because we cannot align. For us, there is no micro and there is no macro. Economics is at the mesoeconomics. The community level is the most important for Islamic economics. The neighborhood, a collection of people who are working together, cooperating, and building. And this doesn't exist in normal economics. So if we try to align with Western frameworks, we will simply not be able to align with Islamic frameworks. So, Osama?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Sir, I have two questions. Actually, I have written in this on this chat also. So, developed and advanced economies will survive this degrowth, but developing and emerging economies will not. What's your take on it? And the second question is about the Industrial Revolution has radically altered man's environment. It is to be expected that as technology is increasingly applied to the human body and mind, man himself will be altered as radically as his environment, and way of life has been changed. And the balance of power between individual and the larger systems flipped also, when machines made much of the human labor obsolete, while simultaneously allowing big corporations and big governments to observe, track, exclude, and social media bans stripping away bank accounts, anyone being naughty. What's your take on it?
Well, let me take the two questions are, of course, very different. First of all, the idea that the poor countries of the world cannot survive degrowth, this is wrong. Basically, if you look at how Russia and China developed, you see, growth is indiscriminate. It says that, okay, if you increase the number of cars you manufacture, then that is growth. But what Russia and China did was that they industrialized, but the people did not increase their standards of living. They were still driving bicycles. They were not importing luxury goods. So we need to keep our lifestyle simple, and we need to make sure that we have a technology which is sufficient for defense. And that's exactly what was done by Russia. They channeled all their productivity capacity into essential items, which part of which was defense, but also other things. So basically, make sure that you have the hydroponics needed to feed everybody. Invest in agriculture so that there is enough food for everybody. Invest in the medical sector. So, but there's a huge amount of waste which is done, and that waste can be curtailed, and it might look like growth is not going on, because if you look at the GNP statistics, your consumer goods will become less. You will produce simpler things, easier things, and less things which are of less value on the market, and so the price will be less. But you will satisfy the needs of everybody, and so as long as you satisfy the needs of everybody, um, the fact that the rich people cannot consume their luxury products will actually be of great benefit to society. So that's one thing. Other thing is, technology is a sideshow. And if we are believers, then Allah Ta'ala has created man. So technology cannot change man. The test, we have been created by Allah Ta'ala, and we will die and we will be answerable to Allah Ta'ala. So we have to do good deeds. We have to avoid bad deeds. This fundamental purpose of the creation of the universe cannot be changed by technology. All right, so I think that let's go to Zishan Aziz. Yes.
I want to ask two very basic questions. How to bring.
There's a lot of noise on your line, but if you talk loudly, we can hear it probably.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, now.
I have two very basic questions. One is how to bring rise to Islamic system. Your take would only be to get knowledge, or any parallel system we should be working on that. First question.
This is very bad. I can't hear you. Put your question in the chat box. Let me go on to Iqra.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Firstly, I would like to thank you for putting this lecture out in very easy to understand terms. And secondly, it was nice to see, or rather hear, the references to my teachers, Dr. Timothy Winter, Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, and Dr. Abdullah Rothman. So it was nice to hear that from you. My question, I think, is just me reflecting on the lesson today. And if I were to simplify it for myself, I think essentially what I am asked here to do is strike a balance between asceticism, zuhud, and on the other hand, maintaining myself in terms of seeking goodness from this dunya, in terms of like God likes beauty, God likes good smell, God likes me to wear nice clothes, things like that. So if I were to put it simply for myself. And also, I think what people don't realize is pressure around me. For example, my parents are essentially economical migrants to this country. And then they would urge me to look into options of buying a house on mortgage, for example, or things like that. So that old system needs changing, but it probably starts from me. And I would actually like to seek your advice more on how this can be infiltrated to change my parents' mindset in a way. So if you can, please.
Now, the thing is, actually, a lot of people after my lectures contact me on my personal channels to ask for personal advice on how to manage, and this has to be complicated because it's very particular to your personal situation as to what your career path should be, how you should use your life. So I'm very happy to advise, but this is something which is very individualized. So I will pass on that and ask you to contact me directly, separately. Okay.
Sure, I'll do that. Can you at least comment on the first part of my question in terms of striking a balance between these two things?
Yeah, normally, you see, if I look at myself, we are so heavily imbalanced on the side of, preferring this life of this world to that of the akhirah, that this is not a big issue. I mean, if I'm spending uh, uh, 8 hours on pursuit of worldly pleasures and 1 hour on my deen, then I should work for reducing worldly pursuit to 7 hours and increase my deen to 2 hours. And so, I mean, there were Sahaba who were given the opposite advice. There was this Sahabi who was spending all his days in fasting and all his nights in worship. And the Prophet ﷺ told him that, look, your body has rights upon you, and your wife has rights upon you, and so on. And your nafs has rights upon you, and so on. So, but that's really, I don't think that there's anybody in this world right now who would need that advice. But actually what happens is that people who are deeply into the dunya, they cite this hadith that, look, so it's cited for in the opposite of what was intended to do.
That's very insightful. Thank you.
Okay. People are asking practical questions about how to implement this system. There are a couple of things. The lecture 6 was about precisely this issue, that how do we go about loosening the grip of capitalism upon us, and how do we create an Islamic system. And lecture 7 was addressed on the current economic problems of Pakistan and how we can solve them. So if you want to look at practical applications of these ideas, go back and look at lectures 6 and 7. All right, Hasib Mujtaba.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi. Can you hear me, Sheikh? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
First of all, Professor, thanks a lot for giving such an opportunity to all of us. And this is such a, I can't explain it. So I'll go direct to my question. I have a question and it has two aspects, both connected. First one is that if we want to learn Islamic economics, we have to learn the philosophy of Islam towards economics. And how does it work, and what is its most fundamental element, like people, not the money, as you have explained. Now, I want to understand this philosophy myself. What should I do? What literature should I consume? I'm a mechanical engineering student and have no economics background, and that's good, I suppose. And this is the first aspect. And the other aspect, which is connected one, is even if I learn the philosophy, which is like an algorithm, you put a prompt, it gives you a response accordingly. Even if I learn it, inspire my family members, I can see that if people like you who are really informed and highly educated and seasoned people are finding it close to impossible to overthrow this curse of consumerism and implement the system of Allah, how can I make myself the right person, the competent person, to be a brick of this wall? Thank you.
Well, I think that I have tried to answer these questions very specifically in my lectures. So I think if you just go through my lectures, and as you said, not knowing economics is an advantage, not a disadvantage, because economics actually gives you wrong ideas, and then you have to first get rid of them, and then you can understand. But if you don't have any economics, you have not been brainwashed, and so you'll be able to understand more easily. So if this is the 8th lecture, if you just go through the lectures, there's a lot of material in here. In this material also, there's a lot of references, and many of this is very condensed. And in the lectures, I give pointers that if you want to read more about this, go to this source, read this book, watch this video, etc. So there is even though the lectures themselves are only 8, if you just follow up the references, there's a huge amount of material. So if you want to study, this will be enough to just go through the lectures in sequence, which are all available conveniently, easily on the website. Okay, so I think that we have gone over the time and I don't see any more hands. And if there is one more question, I can take it. But if you have somebody in chat, you can write something, or Daniel. Okay, let this be the last question. By the way, I see in the chat people talking about the IMF and etc. So I've answered all of those questions, Yani. I've discussed about power and how we should respond to that. Just go through the past lectures, you will find the answers. Okay, Daniel.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. I just want to ask, while you were responding to my question previously, what I understood is that cooperatives, structurally, there is no problem. But as far as the value which is driving those cooperatives is problematic.
Actually, Islam has its own theory of the firm, and it is actually cooperative. But the central difference is that our goal is not to make profits. Our goal is to serve our community. And so this creates a setup which is rather different from anything that I have seen. So our bottom line is how much service did we provide to the community? And the earning we make is only what is needed to provide this service. I mean, if we don't make any earnings, then we won't be able to continue this task for long. So this conception of the firm is rather different from anything that I have seen.
So I'm sorry, sir. Can you provide some resources or provide some links to those resources through which I can understand what is the Islamic theory of a firm?
It's available in my works. If you look at my articles, I have discussed this in a number of different places.
Oh, okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Jazakallah.
Okay, I think that we will call it quits at this point. There are many places where you can ask questions. There's my website, of course, in which I have normally post most of these lectures, and you can put a question in there. My contact information is easily available. Anybody who's on my mailing list has my email, and you can ask me directly via email. So let's stop here. And Subhana Rabbika Rabbil Izzati Amma Yasifun wa Salamun al Mursaleen Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Okay, so we can end recording here.